Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone joining, and welcome to our webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today. As you saw from our materials, this webinar is co-sponsored by two organizations, IFC and the Sustainable Hospitality Alliance. My name is Michelle Farrell, and I'm a Senior Operations Officer at IFC, the International Finance Corporation. I will be serving as your Master of Ceremonies today, and I will call on the speakers from our two organizations to contribute to this conversation. Now, just a few notes on our webinar. As you know, this is a first in a series of webinars that will repeat every 3 weeks through May, and they will take you through tools and investment programs that can unlock finance for green and resilient hotels. Each of our webinars will be recorded, and the presentations and recording will be shared on the landing site. So if we can just go to the next slide. Now, during the webinar, you can ask your questions via the chat in the WebEx application, and we will be sure to address these all at the end. So thank you for your patience. Now, next slide. In today's session, you will discover the importance of climate proofing the hotel industry and the strong business case for green and resilient hotels. You will gain an overview of some of the Sustainable Hospitality Alliance's free tools and resources to help you kickstart your climate journey. You will also hear about IFC's comprehensive climate solutions for their hotel industry, including our GRIP program and a preview of the tools we will talk about in future webinars. Now let me turn to Claire from the Sustainable Hospitality Alliance to set the scene for today's webinars and introduce their work. Claire, could you tell me a bit about the Sustainable Hospitality Alliance?
Yeah, of course, Michelle. Thank you very much for having us, for co-hosting this with us. Yeah, I'd love to tell you a bit about the Alliance. So the Sustainable Hospitality Alliance brings together engaged hospitality companies and strategic partners. We use the collective power of the industry to deliver impact within local communities on global issues. And we work with senior executives from our hotel members and partners to address key challenges which are affecting our planet and its people. Our members make up over 40% of the global hotel industry by rooms, and it includes 22 world-leading hotel companies with a combined reach of 50,000 properties and 7 million rooms. We also work with other parts of the value chain. So at the bottom of the screen there, you can see various other brands, including owners, investors, and other partners through our affiliate membership. And this really enables us to create a more joined up approach to tackling sustainability issues. On the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about the different types of organisations that we work with. So we also provide a platform for governments, non-profits, foundations and other sectors and partners to work with the hospitality industry on regional and global challenges, because we know that we can't do it just as the industry ourselves. We need to partner as much as we possibly can to really increase that impact that we can have. And we're doing that through our vision, which is for a prosperous and responsible hospitality sector, which is really giving back to the destinations more than it takes across 4 key areas of people, planet, place, and prosperity, with an aim to create a better and more sustainable future for all.
Now let's turn to tourism and climate change. Why should hotels be interested in taking action to become greener and more resilient?
That's a very interesting question, Michelle. And hospitality is having a substantial impact on the environment. So that's one of the key issues here. Traditional practices of procurement, consumption and disposal of items are negatively impacting our systems and the environment, including through pollution, habitat destruction and increased greenhouse gas emissions. We know that 1% of total global carbon emissions come from the hospitality industry. We also know that in some locations, tourism is using 8 times more water than the local population. And studies have shown that there's triple the amount of coral damage and disease at sites which have high tourist use. And finally, we know that 18% of food brought by the hospitality and food service industry is wasted every single year, which is further adding to emissions. So we can see that there's a large impact that we're having as an industry. But further to that, We also know on the next slide that within the hospitality industry, we're seeing a dramatic shift in attention towards sustainability because people are understanding that we have this impact. And this is coming from both external and internal drivers, such as a rise in government policy relating to sustainability, an increased corporate customer and guest pressure, investors and asset owners' interest, and the very real impacts that we're already seeing across the world, such as extreme weather and rising temperatures. Climate change is already affecting the hospitality sector, with extreme weather increasing the cost of operations and reducing the number of tourists that we're seeing in certain destinations. Water risks are leading to higher food costs, political and economic instability, and higher energy prices, all of which can negatively impact on the success of hospitality. Waste is also contributing to pollution and can make areas surrounding our hotels unsightly and unattractive for guests to visit. And then finally, a loss of biodiversity can also reduce the availability of materials used to build our hotels and the food that we serve to our guests. And it also damages the unique places that our guests are travelling to see, so it can have a huge impact on us as an industry. Indeed, in 2020, the Alliance and IFC worked together to compile evidence that building and operating a hotel sustainably has financial and reputational benefits. Our research demonstrated that there's a really strong business case for businesses to take action. And this includes boosting profit margins through utility savings and other efficiencies, which is becoming even more important as we know that there's a lot of uncertainty out there around energy prices. We've seen increasing revenues by satisfying the customer expectation of sustainability and requirements coming into RFPs from corporate customers, which is happening more and more. We saw that there was a benefit around future-proofing investment strategies. And I know you'll talk a little bit about this today, but sustainability can really open doors to green finance mechanisms such as ESG-linked loans and green bonds. And investors are starting to put more and more green and other ESG, so social as well, criteria that they're linking in to get access to particular types of funding. We also know that it can help to respond to regulatory reporting requirements and costs, such as carbon taxes, which are increasing, and we know that sustainable building design can help with these. It can help to ensure the long-term value of properties through things like certifications, and it can ensure long-term energy supply through on-site renewables, not to mention the additional benefits that can be seen, such as increased staff engagement and retention when they can see that you're a company that really aligns with their values. And we know that retention and trying to get people into this industry has been a challenge over the past few years. So anything that can help with that has got to be a benefit.
Thanks, Claire, for summarizing these challenges. Now, I'm interested to know, what is the industry doing to respond to this?
Well, the industry is really starting to step up and is making bigger and bolder commitments through the Glasgow Declaration for Climate Action in Tourism. This is a catalyst which really accelerates climate action and provides support to the tourism industry to try and halve emissions by 2030 and reach net zero as soon as possible before 2050. Organisations are signing up to the declaration and they're committing to create climate action plans, which include things like measuring emissions, taking actions to decarbonise and restore ecosystems, collaborating with key stakeholders, and importantly, making plans for how they'll finance these efforts as well. Alongside this, I can share a bit about the commitments that have been made across the industry, and many organisations across hospitality have really taken up this challenge and have made commitments both within and outside of the frameworks, such as the Glasgow Declaration and Science-Based Targets initiatives to reduce their emissions. You can see a selection here on the screen, but there's many more out there. But as you can see, many companies are really starting to kind of step up and make big, bold commitments as to what they want to do to reduce their impacts.
Now, it's really great to hear about all the commitments that are being made, but how are you supporting the industry in responding to and implementing the changes needed to meet these commitments?
Yeah, so to help the industry, we've created the Pathway to Net Positive Hospitality, and this brings together the industry to really align behind the most material and crucial issues. And it shows them how they can achieve our vision of a prosperous and responsible hospitality sector, which is giving back more than it takes. We know that the industry needs support and won't be able to do it by itself, and that's, you know, part of the reason that we're here. And the pathway incorporates people, planet, place, and prosperity. It breaks that journey down, the journey to net positive hospitality, into 4 stages, starting with measuring impacts by establishing baselines and starting to reduce impact by simple actions. So, for example, we incorporate the hotel sustainability basics into that stage. Secondly, it's about minimizing negative impacts by taking stronger action and really starting to engage with key stakeholders. The third step is all about achieving net zero while leaving no one behind. And that's about engaging suppliers, taking innovative approaches, and really starting to work as part of the wider value chain. And then finally, giving back more than you take. And that's across the whole value chain. So not just thinking about your own operations, but really working with the suppliers so that they are also having reduced impacts. And that's where partnerships and regenerative solutions become really, really important to move towards the guiding star of becoming net positive across hospitality. We've also, on the next slide, created a framework which lays out the outcomes for each stage of this pathway for the material topics. And we've aligned this with ESG, environmental, social, and governance, so that it works within frameworks that businesses are used to using now. And one thing that often comes up when we share our resources with companies is that although they understand the business case that I've just discussed, and they can see how the pathway can really help them to create their strategy and action plan, they're not sure where to turn to find funds to help them to implement these plans. And while we have some guidance in the pathway support materials, we rely very much on experts in the field, such as IFC, to provide detailed guidance and support through their various programs. So we're really excited to have this opportunity to talk to you today and to discuss some of those financial opportunities that there are for people to use.
Thank you so much, Claire. I'm sure we're going to have a ton of questions for you at the end of the webinar, so I'll be addressing those when we finish. But now moving on to our next speaker, allow me to turn to Rajat Malik. He is the Global Upstream Lead for Tourism, Retail, and Property sectors at IFC. So Rajat will talk about IFC's comprehensive offer in this space, which he has branded as GRIP, a program to green real estate investment portfolios. Rajat, before we start the program, can you introduce IFC and what we are doing generally and what we do in the field of green buildings?
Cool. Thanks, Michelle. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. So before we step into green buildings and green hotels specifically, let me just introduce you to IFC. So IFC sits within the World Bank Group. But IFC has a specific mandate to finance private sector enterprises and private sector companies in emerging markets. And it's the largest private sector DFI in the world. So we made and specifically moving down to hotels, IFC has been actively investing in hotels since 1967. We've invested in projects in over 95 countries and mostly all emerging markets, from more middle-income countries to frontier markets in across regions. So our partnerships in the hospitality sector vary from direct investment partnerships with hotel owners and funds who own hotels or single asset owners in emerging markets to collaborations like the one we did with the Alliance here, where we try and influence the industry to move towards more sustainable development of hotels. As Claire mentioned earlier, there's a tremendous case for green hotels and sustainable hospitality across, even in emerging markets, and we'll talk more about that as we go through the slides.
Thanks, Raja. But how do you see the macro environment and how is that impacting the industry?
Yeah, so Claire did touch about a few of those topics, but I'll sort of start with this broad picture, right? Why is sustainability so important in the current environment? So now more than, I mean, this number may have changed as we speak, but more than 70 countries and 700 cities across the world have set their net zero targets. So what that means for us as property owners, as bankers, as an alliance, we would see more and more regulations, more policies coming in, which would incentivize and push property owners, the private sector, to move towards sustainability. And we are seeing this in a few markets already, but we would see more and more of these regulations coming in. So as property owners or hotel owners or hotel operators, I think it's extremely important. It will directly impact your business in the near to medium term. And we are seeing more sophisticated players already starting to plan for this. The second part, which is also important, so there are the policymakers who are extremely important. They define the environment that you work in. But there are also the investors, including World Bank, but also there are around 74 institutional investors who've joined the Net Zero Alliance convened by UN, which control more than $10 trillion in assets, right? So that's huge. What that again means for you is if as a business owner or as a portfolio owner or as an institution, you're trying to attract institutional capital in the near future, you need to start planning for this because the money is gonna come with some commitments on climate, and also it gives you an edge over other sponsors and competing businesses, right? So, but having said that, we still are way far off from our targets. At the current rate, only 10% of the buildings that are existing are expected to be refurbished by 2030. But that leaves us with a huge opportunity to increase that to 40%, right? That unlocks another $1 trillion in investments. So that's and 25 million jobs that can be created. So that just gives you an idea on the macro environment that we're working in and why is the World Bank and other financial institutions very interested in making this happen.
Okay, that's very interesting. Now, I think perhaps we should step back and talk about some of the definitions that we've mentioned here today. So we've been talking about green buildings, net zero, climate resilience. How do these fit in and what do they mean?
Extremely important. Thanks, Michelle, for bringing that up. See, we as IFC and the World Bank Group, we work with global financial and reporting standards like GRESB, like ICMA, or climate bonds, on setting standards, right? Because as a financial institution, you need a verifiable standard or certification that can be used when you're using green finance. And I'll get to that in the next slide. But these standards that we are talking about right now talk about hotel as a building, as a real estate asset, right? So there are three key criteria that they have to meet to qualify for green financing. The building should be certified as green using an international standard. There are certain country standards which do not qualify, but there are LEED, there is EDGE that we'll be having a full webinar on, but something that's accredited by the international financial or reporting standards. So it should be certified as green. It should at least have 20% better performance in energy and water consumption than your local baseline. And it should be able to report their impact, the savings on energy, water, and GHG emissions. We are constantly looking at sort of improving these, and you would see that again when we have the webinar on Edge, that how are we improving this tool, right? Constantly, we're trying to sort of raise the bar on sustainability. But again, as asset owners, it's extremely important for you to look at these using the right certification that is accepted by most global financial institutions or reporting standards. So moving on, like we said in the previous slide, right, that 20% is the bare minimum reduction that is expected, or 20% more efficiency is required. But that's not the end, right? We're trying to really push the bar. So we have something which is called an Edge Advance, which is 40% reduction, and then an Edge Zero Carbon, which pushes you to 100% reduction. And when we talk about net zero, what we really want to look at is you maximize your energy efficiency in your buildings or a portfolio, you maximize your renewable potential, and then only move to offsets or this to get to net zero. But in new construction, we're even pushing for net zero right when you're planning it. And having said that, we understand net zero and resilient portfolios can take a lot of time, right? These are complex buildings which you may have acquired, may have built in the past. So they take time, right? As a portfolio of 20 buildings or 100 buildings, it's not that easy. So a strategic roadmap, which we call as a net zero roadmap or a net zero plan, is required as a start. And then you sort of gradually, with specific KPIs, start moving towards a target. And some of the targets that Claire had mentioned with the large groups, you would see they would be backed up by such a plan. Because we do not even, I mean, while we're being very aggressive with climate targets, we do not expect groups to do everything in the next 2 years, right? But a good start is having a strategic roadmap and start moving on that as quickly as possible.
That's really excellent. And we've seen many examples that aligning with these definitions are helping our clients attract international green finance and perhaps even getting better green financing terms. So in addition, this also is going to help them with their ESG reporting requirements. But you've also mentioned that these things take time. So we would like to get to the meat of this matter. And how can IFC as an institution help?
Super important, and I think that's really the crux of this discussion. And so IFC has been part of the green building space for many years, right? So we have a 4-part engagement model, right? So on one side, we are working with the public policy and enabling environment on ensuring, working with policymakers to ensure that there are enough incentives and the ease of getting the right policy incentives is there for property owners and hotel chains to look at green buildings. On the other side, we are directly investing with companies. We are backing this up with money in real projects, in hotel projects, resorts, where we are working on green buildings. And then on the advisory side, we have Edge and the Building Resilience Index, which again, we'll talk about. We have 2 separate webinars precisely for that, but they are globally accredited tools which you can use to achieve green buildings quite quickly and quite efficiently. And the last one is we also work with our partner banks, right? So it's not only what IFC is directly investing in, we have partner banks across emerging markets and we work with them to green their portfolio. So it's a holistic, we're trying to sort of influence the whole market and ecosystem, if I can call it. So these are the 2 tools that I was just talking about. So Edge, it works on the green building certification, which aims at reducing carbon emissions. But then a new tool that we're working on is Building Resilience Index, super important in today's time, where you're talking about how resilient or how do you measure your resilience of a specific building. Very important for buildings which are uh, in more sensitive zones, if I can call them. But again, you'll get into more detail about these two tools. There would be two technical sessions lined up as part of this webinar series. But more importantly, apart from the tools, IFC has been constantly investing for the past 7 or 8 years in green buildings. We've almost invested $1 billion annually. And these are emerging markets, right? So there are limited ticket sizes, but still we've been managing, and we're planning to ramp this up quite aggressively.
So you had mentioned some of these financial products, and one of the interesting ones is the sustainable linked bonds. Can you walk us through some of these instruments that IFC offers?
Thanks, Michelle. Yes. So it's important that it's not only finance that IFC provides, it's about the green financing tools, right? So they range from green bonds, green loans, and sustainability linked loans. So again, we can spend a full session on these alone, but just to give you a highlight of this, so green loans and green bonds are instruments specifically for eligible green projects. And we can go through the definitions, but green buildings certified by a specific certifications by certain sort of internationally accredited certifications are qualify as eligible green projects. And then there are sustainability linked loans where there are step downs or step ups, but incentives basically built into your loan, which are linked to certain KPI targets on carbon emission reduction or certain other kind of sort of KPIs, climate KPIs, if I can call them, built into your loan. So these are super interesting. I would strongly recommend everyone to sort of look at who's looking at financing their projects to look at these instruments. And IFC again has been a leader in emerging markets on pushing these instruments through the markets through either directly IFC finance projects or even through our partner organizations. So that brings us to the last part of the presentation, where we've talked about all of these offerings that IFC has, but one of our latest offering has been is GRIP, which is Greening Real Estate Investment Portfolios, where we're trying to sort of bring all our offerings into one package for large real estate owners. So anyone, a family fund, a private equity fund, a sovereign wealth fund, or even a corporation owning a bunch of hotels in this case, or buildings, basically. We work with them on firstly helping them define that climate pathway, and then backing that up with financing that transition. So it's a one-stop shop to sort of define, implement, and finance green transition for large groups. And how it works in practice is in the phase 1 of the engagement, IFC directly works with these owners and groups on defining their baseline, coming up with green guidelines, defining what their corporate level ambition can be, and then coming up with a comprehensive decarbonization pathway of, let's say, once you've defined where you are today, where you want to go, and then you come up with a pathway of how do you get there, right? With interim KPIs. The best part about that is then based on that, we come up with an investment plan. How much financing is required to get there? And phase 2 is then financing that, right? So let's say you need 50 million or 100 million to refurbish a few of your hotels or build new ones, or you're acquiring new hotels and you want to refurbish them to green. We can finance that at the end. We are already working. I mean, we have, again, I can share the link towards all the groups that we work with some recent ones, and they range um, from CapitaLand's Ascot partners in Singapore to a family-owned group called Marmara Group in Turkey, to other sort of similar groups in Mexico, in India. We're working with all of them on green financing for hotels. And last, I think again Claire touched on this when we were speaking, but it's important for us as the building community or the hotel community to understand what are the benefits for us, right? The first one is, of course, that you have utility savings, right? In a lot of markets, utilities have gone very expensive. So any savings that you do, the more efficient you're building, the less you're consuming, and that goes to your bottom line. Second, and which we call as value preservations, right? Earlier, it used to be all about, okay, I'll get a premium of if I go green, but it's also about preserving your value. If you have policies that negatively impact your portfolio, or your investors start putting a brown discount, against a green premium, that's also extremely important for long-term asset owners. And last is, of course, you increase your value through validation. There's an increased brand value. There's an increased competitive advantage, at least in the near term, for when you approach investors. Okay, so with that, I'll pass it back to Michelle.
Yes, so thank you so much, Claire and Rajat, for your insights today. So just to engage the audience now, this is just a short reminder that the webinar will be recorded, and the presentation and the recording will be shared on the landing site very shortly, so you'll be able to find it there. Now, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and we will start addressing those as we go. And at the close of the webinar, the WebEx app will take you to the landing site. So if you haven't had the chance to register for the follow-up webinars, especially those that were mentioned by both Rajat and Claire about the BRI and also EDGE certification tools, that will give you more insights on that. So now moving to the question and answers, I'll bring up some questions for the panelists. So first question was, where does IFC operate? Considering that the majority of hospitality assets are in developed economies, are they able to seek support on green investments, or how do we know which countries they operate in? I have put a link in the chat, but also maybe if you could just touch on that, Raja, that'd be great.
So emerging markets, primarily, if I have to simplify this, but I would still strongly recommend that you go through the link, and it does keep changing, but primarily we don't directly invest in North America or Western Europe or GCC or Australia and New Zealand. But that does not mean that we do not work with companies who operate there, right? So there could be investors who are based in North America, but they have hotels in Mexico, for example, or the Caribbean. So we can work with that. But I would still strongly recommend that you look at the website, and it's all mentioned. Like by region, we have clear countries where we operate.
And I get a question
by
for
emerging
Claire.
markets, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I was going to move on to the question for Claire, but please finish.
No, go ahead. That's it.
Okay, so Claire, I have a question. Now, when you're talking about this net zero planning and this pathway that you have developed, what sort of emissions are considered? Is that going to be only operational, or are embedded emissions considered as well?
So it's a bit of a mixture, depending on who it is who's working through it. So particularly when you think about the pathway that we have, we're looking at that from the viewpoint of different stakeholders who are involved in the sustainability of hotels. We've got the owner, the asset owner, the operator, and the brand, and they'll all have different responsibilities. So particularly sort of the brand and the operator, we would tend to focus more on the operational side of emissions. But when it comes to the asset owner, that would definitely be considering the embedded carbon. And then I think when you look at the commitments that have been made across the industry, again, that is kind of taken into account. So some of those organisations have, when you look at the brands, they have a high portion of franchising within their sort of structure. And for those types of organisations, they'll be thinking more about the operational side of things, and less about the embodied carbon within the building. But I know that even some who are more on the operational side and don't own as much, are still thinking about the embedded carbon, particularly when it comes to working with new developments. So they might be putting in standards that are requiring that if you want to brand your hotel, whatever brand it might be, they're starting to put requirements in that it has to meet certain standards in terms of the embedded carbon. So it's a bit of a mixture out there, but embedded carbon is certainly becoming more and more important and is getting talked about a lot more as part of the net zero conversations.
Great, thank you so much, Claire. Now, another question, and I'll direct this to Rajat for IFC, and I think this is a really key point. Now, does IFC consider participating in existing portfolios and providing financing or refinancing for retrofit?
So I mean, we can discuss that on a case-by-case basis as well, but as an overview, we do finance existing hotels, right? So it's not, we've moved from financing only sort of greenfield projects to refurbishment. There's a strong focus on refurbishing existing hotels and making them green, right? So, and if it's at a portfolio level, so let's assume a family fund owns 15 hotels and they want to, and they're due for refurbishment at different times. We can finance the refurbishment of these hotels, provided they can be they're refurbished to a standard where they can be green certified. On refinancing, it's a tricky one. So by essence, we don't do refinancing only, but again, it's a case-by-case basis where how deals are structured. But I think what I can clearly say here is that we do finance refurbishment of hotels. So it does not only have to be greenfield.
Yes, and some of our recent projects absolutely show that. So that's great. Now, another question about EDGE certification, and I can also take this one as well as I'm part of the EDGE team. So EDGE certification includes also water and materials targets. Do you also require the 20% on all three pillars to be achieved, or is energy only enough? So to get EDGE certification and participate in this sort of certification system, you do need to achieve 20% on all three pillars. And that would be the same for other rating systems. In other rating systems, you also have to achieve other credits, but to become certified, the threshold is there. And maybe, Rajat, could you also expand on that? If they are using something like LEED or BREEAM, what are the thresholds?
Sorry, I didn't get the question.
Sorry. So if right now they're asking, do you require 20% on all three pillars to be achieved, or is reaching 20% on energy efficiency enough to participate in the program?
That question may be better off. I mean, I would strongly recommend that you attend the second session on EDGE, and they can get into far more depth on technical issues there.
Yes, absolutely. And
I mean, they will also sort of run you through, how it works.
And we'll touch on all of those, but to achieve the certification, you will need to achieve 20% in all of three categories. Now, here's a more specific country question. So Botswana is big in tourism. Is it considered under the emerging markets? And I'll put that link back in the chat as well.
Definitely. So Botswana, these are all sort of emerging markets for us. if there's a credible sponsor backing the projects, and we definitely look at all those countries. Botswana's there, like to answer your question.
Wonderful. Now, another question that people have had is, if you have a portfolio of hotels, what are the next steps to getting started, right? How do they reach out to you? How do they get in touch with IFC?
So if I get that correctly, there's someone or some company which owns a bunch of hotel or portfolio of hotels. Okay, so if that's the question, I think you can reach out to either Michelle or me, and we're happy to sort of start discussing on how to best firstly understand what the nature of your portfolio is, understand where you are on the sustainability journey, and then sort of design a program for you, right? And it can be quick. You firstly have to assess what the baseline emissions look like, then come up with your climate target, right? Do you want to be aggressive and you want to go net zero by 2040, for example, 2035, or some groups I saw, they want to become carbon neutral by 2030. So do you want, based on where you are right now and how complex or simple is your portfolio, you want to set a target, and then come up with a decarbonization pathway. Based on that, we can come up with an investment plan and look at what's the best way and best instrument to finance it.
Now, I have a question for Claire. In terms of what sort of assistance, if I'm a hotel chain or I'm at hotel asset owners, what sort of assistance can the Sustainable Hospitality Alliance provide to me?
Well, we've got lots of resources which are all freely available. We're a charity as an organisation, so our aim really is to impact across the entire industry and support as many organisations as we possibly can. So we make everything as much as possible free. So we have lots of different resources, some of which are focused. For example, the pathway that I mentioned takes a very broad and holistic view across environmental and social issues. But we also have specific resources such as the Hotel Carbon Measurement Initiative, which is a methodology and a tool which enables hotels and organisations to understand their carbon footprint and to really sort of put it in terms that make sense to them, that they can also share those metrics with, for example, their corporate customers and their guests, or investors as well can make use of those metrics. We have a similar tool for measuring the footprint of water. And then alongside those sort of measurement tools, we have lots of different fact sheets and guidance reports, particularly thinking about how you can improve the energy efficiency of your building, or how you can embed water stewardship into what you're doing. So we have those resources which are freely available. We also have the opportunity for any organisation to become a member. So I mentioned various memberships at the beginning, thinking about those organisations which are either brands or individual hotels, but also those that are sort of supporting the industry. So the owners, the investors, different consultancies, people like that. We want to work with as many people as possible. So how we do that is really to bring those organisations together and to kind of get that dialogue going. And many of our members find that in those discussions, they're able to learn so much from their peers, basically, in terms of understanding the different challenges that people are having, different best practices, but also sometimes we're able to kind of pick up on something which is a common challenge across lots of people, and then we're able to take that and work on it and try and find a solution. And that's actually where our Hotel Carbon Measurement Initiative started, was kind of a common challenge. So that sort of support as well in making connections with peers and understanding and learning from each other as well is a key way that we're here to support the industry.
That's great to hear. Now, there's another question about, has any work been done to align with taxonomy? And is EDGE certification aligned with taxonomy? And I'm going to assume here this is going to be EU taxonomy. The answer is EDGE will provide you with the output necessary. You will have to do a secondary calculation, but the output is exactly what you need in terms of giving you that basis of data, quantitative data that's looking at GHG emissions, and is going to give you that feedback you need for reporting with taxonomies, but also for ESG. So earlier in the presentation, Rajat showed GRESB, for example. If you're doing GRESB reporting, CDP, any of those ESG reports, it is also aligned with and accepted for. So that's definitely a yes on that question. There's also a few other questions. Nigeria, Brazil, yes, those are considered emerging markets for us. And just looking down into some of the other questions, some questions about other green financing with different types of certification. I think for these particular types of certifications, such as the Global Sustainable Tourism Council, things like EarthCheck, we would have to look at those on a case-by-case basis. But again, please, this is a case where you'd want to send us an email to reach out and get that more information. Just going through the last of the questions. If anyone has any final points to add as well, please let me know and step in. I do want to remind everyone that the presentation and recording will be shared after this seminar. We will be sending that out to everyone. If you had specific questions as well around EU taxonomy, about alignment with certain types of codes, or alignment with certain types of ESG reporting, the EDGE team has an entire resource of one-pagers that will talk to and introduce how this alignment works with these different standards. And again, as we have all mentioned before, we highly encourage you to attend the specific session on EDGE and on BRI as well. Just looking through, it looks like we've addressed most of the questions. So if there's nothing else today, I just want to thank you so much to both of our panelists, to Claire and to Rajat from IFC, Claire from Sustainable Hospitality Alliance. The one-pagers will be coming to you via email. I will be sending those out for all the topics that we talked about today. And we'll be able to get those back to everyone. Okay, great. All right, well, thank you again for our panelists. Thank you to everyone for joining. And again, don't forget to sign up to our next series, and we really look forward to having you there. All right, thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon, evening, or day.
Thank you.